Two seals and a walrus.
Hey guys, welcome to Two Seals and a Walrus. As always, I am joined by my co-hosts Ben Johnson, United States Navy SEAL Sniper Medic, and Doug Moulton, United States Navy SEAL, who are on the other side of the table. I'm Sean Webb, your co-host, and today we have an amazing guest who comes from us from the University of Arizona. He's the Assistant Director for the Center of Consciousness Studies, Jay Sanguinetti. Welcome to the show.
Thank you. Great to be here.
That's one of the coolest titles I think I've heard in a long time. Like anything connected with a Center for Consciousness Studies, I think is just the coolest title ever. What do you do as a day job, and what is that cool thing sitting behind you?
Yeah, that's a good question. I was actually just negotiating my new job title. I wanted to be Professor of Consciousness. Sound pretty cool, right?
I feel like if you have that title, you're working with Dr. Manhattan also.
Yeah, right.
I wanted to be a Dharma enforcer, but it doesn't sell.
Yeah, the dean didn't go for it, actually. He said, no, you have to be an assistant professor. We can't call you that.
But I understand you're doing some amazing science out there, and I've heard some amazing things about your work, not to get too deep into it too quickly, but like I've heard you're working with some of the most profound and respected mindfulness teachers on the planet, and people who go into deep states of consciousness naturally, looking at their brains and then stimulating their brains and trying to find a quicker, easier, better path to, I guess, spiritual enlightenment or whatever nebulous words you want to try to use to put heightened states of consciousness into, the scientific rigor of measurement and replicability. But that's kind of what you're working on out there, right?
That's right. That's a good description. In a general sense, what we're doing is developing tech that modulates brain function. So for anybody who can see the video, this is one of the little devices that we've designed, which actually focuses a beam of ultrasound into your brain and can actually modulate different circuits in the brain. Now, that has a general application. So we could treat depression, anxiety, Alzheimer's disease. There's a lot of sort of technical medical things that we can go after. But most of the work in my lab is really around mindfulness, as you said. Mm-hmm. And trying to accelerate the practice of mindfulness. So we're not trying to take it away. We're not trying to just zap you into an enlightenment state, if that would be possible, but really trying to couple it with meditation so that people get the benefits faster.
Excellent. So can you, for the lay people in the audience who don't understand a lot about mindfulness, can you give us a quick 50,000-foot overview of what that's all about?
Sure. So mindfulness describes a set of practices that typically come from Buddhist practices from 2,500 years ago. And the basic idea is to train your attention to allow you to be more present in the current moment. So pretty simple, but you try to do that with a certain type of attitude, which is non-attached, or whatever happens just happens, and you sort of let it occur. So mindfulness has a ton of benefits. Just bringing your attention into the present moment and having a certain attitude towards the moment tends to help people deal with problems. If you're a basketball player, you can shoot the ball more effectively. If you're a Navy SEAL, you can carry out your duties more effectively. So really, it applies to basically anything that you're doing and tends to increase your level of enjoyment, happiness, and those types of things while you're doing it.
Now, is this connected with getting into the state of flow, or because I know the SEALs have been hot on wanting to get a way of dumping team members into the state of flow where they can kind of reduce their egoic influence and ultimately become, like immediately as on demand, become a cohesive unit.
It was the opening example in Stealing Fire.
Okay.
It's this flow state is such a thing that needs to be self-implemented. So having that machine on everybody on an operation so that when shit gets weird, they all push a button at the same time and go into flow, that will never be a thing. The value of learning about the flow state and how to organically elicit it on demand is the process of fundamentally understanding it with experience. So this would be really good for somebody to increase their efficacy in flow state once they've already achieved the capacity to elicit it. But you won't be able to teach somebody how to push the button, like easy button, and then be on everybody's same page.
Okay.
I mean, that's an assumption I'm making from somebody who trained it. I don't know if you guys
Yeah.
see the same data.
No, that's totally insightful, actually, because that's what I mean. We need to couple this with training. So the idea is we're making the training more effective.
Yeah, it's like
So take
steroids. You don't take steroids and get massive. You take steroids and whatever you do, you get 110% benefit of.
Exactly. Yep. And I think, the notion of the relationship between the self and the flow state is really crucial here. You take a disorder like depression or anxiety, what happens is the self mechanism, the ego mechanism has overactivated, right? An ego and a self is a very important thing to have. It helps us survive in the world. But if you have some trauma, you have too much anxiety, you live through a pandemic, the ego can overactivate, and you need to unstick from that so you can reapply your attention to whatever task that you're on. And flow is such an interesting case because it's just as you said, by relating to yourself in a certain way, you can get it out of the way so you can go into this flow state. And that's part of what happens with meditation training as well. You sort of relate to yourself in a different way such that you don't get so stuck in anxiety, fear, or any of that other stuff. And much like a flow state, what tends to happen is that you just love whatever's happening. You become curious about the environment.
Yeah, it's like fishing.
Food takes on a
Right.
richness, right? Music takes on this richness, right? So you're exactly right. We would never want to remove the ego or anything like that. We want to give you a better relationship and better control over those systems.
Wow, that's great. So what got you into this? Like, where'd you go to school? What was your degree? How did you start in this? Because I got to tell you, I mean, I'm a little older than you, so I don't think I had the same opportunities, because back when I was making the decision of, possibly doing a master's and PhD and stuff like that, consciousness was just not a thing. Like, you could not speak to anyone in academia about consciousness because it was like, no, you can't. I was told you can't explore consciousness or do any studies on consciousness until you've achieved, your tenure. Yep. So they can't fire you, basically, because everybody's going to start ridiculing you and not taking you seriously, and et cetera. How did you, you must have hit the timing just right to be as old and accomplished as you are, it's still being a relatively young guy, but at the same time, you're at the top of the field of, consciousness studies and figuring out how to map the brain and what portions of the brain to stimulate to get, increases in consciousness in certain areas and stuff like that. Oops, sorry. How'd you get into that?
Yeah, it's a good question. To be truthful, consciousness is still a bad word within certain sectors of science. So it's not totally accepted. But, I think there's a general recognition, both in science, in therapy, pharmaceutical companies and things like that, as well as society in general. We need some consciousness change. We need some uplifting, perspective shift, especially after going through this pandemic, even the way we dealt with it, as a separate people who couldn't see themselves as one, society. So I think the timing is right in multiple ways across society, but specifically within science, there's a psychedelic revolution. Denver has decriminalized psilocybin or magic mushrooms. So, you're seeing this from multiple angles, from the tech piece, which is what I'm in, from the psychedelic therapy piece. And then I think people in general are just getting interested in science and the consciousness of science. The public funds science, right? So whatever they get interested in, we get to study. So I think that's a big part of it. I also think all the easy problems in science, in a sense, have been solved. All the low-hanging fruit has been picked up, and now the big questions are hanging above us. How does the brain create consciousness? Are there aliens? Right? We're starting to see all the science about aliens coming around. So I think also it's becoming more acceptable because we're moving towards these harder problems.
Yeah. Well, I got to tell you, there's no, you've hit the target audience here saying the word aliens around this table. We're super interested in things like consciousness and non-local consciousness and communication with other beings that are potentially flying around.
Hit me at Psychedelics.
and psychedelics is another key word here that we love to explore here. We one of the origin stories is we I was doing some mind stuff and wrote a couple of books, and Ben got a hold of that stuff and was like, wow, this is really cool. And you're talking about deep mind stuff and consciousness expansion and enlightenment and the science behind all that stuff. Have you ever done drugs? And I was like, no, I've never done drugs. And he's like, we're going to Peru. So we went down. I'm like, what a better opportunity to have an amazing life story than to say you were able to go to the depths of the Amazon with 2 Navy SEAls and do copious amounts of ayahuasca. I was like, I'm not passing that up.
Right. Yeah, and a lot of these drugs, people are now calling them medicines, and I think that's a good context to talk about them in. Particularly because what happens to you when you have what's called an ego death or an ego dissolution on these psychedelics is a lot of the dysfunctional patterns in your nervous system become apparent to you.
Right.
So if you've had some trauma, let's say on the battlefield, obviously that trauma can manifest in your body as post-traumatic stress disorder or other issues. And we know now, there's lots of studies that if you take a group of Marines, for example, who've got PTSD, give them ayahuasca or magic mushrooms, and do it within the right context, within a therapeutic context, it's very healing for these people. And so whatever's happening there, that's a very interesting scientific question, right? Why is it that that's healing psychologically? That question really gets at the heart of what we're working on in my lab, which is, we're not just trying to make you more mindful. We're not trying to make you a better basketball player or whatever you're trying to do, but we're trying to give you the means to grow as a human being, to sort of clean up some of this psychological stuff that's going on underneath that, as far as I see it, is manifesting across our society, right? It's leading to a lot of dysfunctional stuff that's going on. And so, that's where the mindfulness fits in. That's where the consciousness piece fits in. And honestly, if there are aliens out there, that's where aliens fits in. That means that we're not special in the universe, and we got to stop pretending like kings and masters of the universe. We can relax and realize that we're just part of this big cosmic, unfolding. Get on with enjoying the moment instead of trying to control reality in our own little domains as we're doing.
Yeah.
So I got a quick question. So I really like the way you described or defined mindfulness. I think for me, maybe others too, I think it's to really kind of embody an idea or onboard an idea or concept, it's important to understand the inverse of it. So if that is how you describe mindfulness, how would you articulate the inverse of mindfulness? If that makes sense.
That's a great question. Yeah, let me give you a little clearer definition. So mindfulness is paying attention on purpose. So now you got 2 pieces, attention and the on purpose, which is my sort of ability to know where my attention is. The opposite of mindfulness is sitting down to Facebook and, thinking, oh, I'm just going to be on Facebook for 2 minutes. And then an hour goes by and you're not even really realizing, that time has passed, what you're doing, what you're paying attention to. So that's really where your attention and your sort of control over your system has been captured by something. There's nothing inherently wrong with that. I don't think there's anything inherently wrong with Facebook. It's just that, the way that Facebook is serving up information to you isn't really totally healthy all the time.
Yeah, I agree with you there. It's like, to me, anything is only as good as the person who is utilizing it and their intent.
Right. And your sort of awareness of what you're doing, where you're putting your attention, why you're putting your attention, what the effect of putting your attention on something like Facebook is having on you. And so mindfulness is that sort of meta piece where you're aware of what's happening, you're sort of watching, sort of like a scientist, you're sort of watching all the effects of what you're doing. And then you're getting to decide, you may be having a little bit of space from what you're doing to make a decision. Do I want to continue engaging with Facebook? Is this serving me as a human being? Or should I go read
That's
a book?
The question.
Or
is this serving
take a
me?
run or something?
Yeah.
But now you're putting the onus on everybody who is what people that recognize it consider to be fundamentally unself-aware.
Mm-hmm.
So in that vein, I disagree wholeheartedly that there's nothing wrong with Facebook. I think the fact that any social media platform is designed by coders to specifically target dopamine modulators in their algorithms is capitalizing on the plague of self-unawareness,
The plague of lack of
and
mindfulness.
and they're duly capitalizing on people's lack of desire or understanding of what needs to be treated in order to push things into their immediate view, whether it's good for them or not, and they're allowing themselves to be censored and polarizing instead
Due
of
to a lack of mindfulness.
or because of bullying from the government or whatever. It doesn't matter. Whatever, they're polarizing and they're censoring things by removing content because one thing or another. So if they're gonna target dopamine modulators when nobody's endocrinologists and mental health care is a luxury, then fuck you. And if you're gonna be censored about the input that you put out there, then fuck you and everybody you work with, and fuck you for ruining everyone that utilizes your product.
Yeah, there's a little bit of a singular focus, I think, on that they want to maximize their clicks and maximize their likes and maximize their opportunity for activity on their platform.
And then they want to complain about gun control because everybody's insane and they got their workplace shot up. Those are the people that need to.
So let's spin this into a question. How do you fit into that? But I mean, honestly, though, how does your work fit into a dynamic that was kind of just laid out? Good, bad, or ugly, and where do you see it going? Where do you see some strong suits or weak points?
Mm-hmm. No, this is great. And I agree with you. I think the current iteration of Facebook is not helping people. It's basically trying to get you to maximize your engagement. That's when you talk to the programmers. They're trying to keep you engaged with the program. And what we're trying to do is give you a sense of awareness of what you're engaged with the first place, give you some control over that engagement, and then let you choose. You ultimately know what's best for you, or that even if you don't know what's best for you, this thing that I'm doing, playing video games for 8 hours a day is probably not serving my goals of getting my homework done or whatever else. So, we want to give people the tools and the training to basically train their minds to sort of wake up to, what am I doing? Where am I? Where's my attention? What do I need to do to get to this next level of my own growth? And giving people the tools to really even define that in the first place. Where I see social media platforms like Facebook is they've inverted that paradigm. So what they're doing is saying, not only do we not want you to engage with your own growth, we want to serve up information to keep you growing into the system. Right? Like, just keep you engaged, get your sense of identity sort of tied into posting pictures on Facebook or
the facade of whatever you want.
And now an ad pops up for, you want to be engaged?
Oh, man.
You want to know what you're prioritizing? Click here.
Yeah.
Right.
Free pill.
I'm probably going to get an advertisement for that later just because you said it. Right? So, giving people that level of awareness, and that ties into consciousness. What are you conscious of? What are you identifying with? Who are you fundamentally as a human being? Do you just see yourself as the person who posts pictures on Facebook? Or do you, define your life as going on a hike and having some pleasure from nature or whatever really, motivates you? So, that's the deep trick in the lab is, can we create a tech? So the thing behind me is a piece of technology that stimulates the brain, but can we use that technology within the context of helping a human grow into something that's a more fulfilled human being? Happier, but happier in the deep sense, more fulfilled in the deep sense, having better relationships, being curious. Like, curiosity is a really important feature for human happiness. And we tend to get curiosity beat out of us by the age of 5 to 10, right? So can we help you sort of unlock a little bit of that of your consciousness or your neural capacity, such that, you can go out in a pandemic and take a walk and realize, oh my God, the world is still here and it's beautiful and the birds are singing, right?
Yeah.
But only if you're wearing a mask.
Only if you're wearing a mask.
So you guys are, you're in the process of poking and prodding people's brains to help discover what portion of the brain helps accelerate mindfulness or awareness in particular facets of life. And is your ultimate goal then to provide something that you could pick up at Target to improve your life or improve your focus or improve your mindfulness?
It's a great question. I mean, ideally, I would like to do that, but as you know, the human brain is a delicate organ, and we have very little understanding of how it actually functions. So although that is the goal, I think it's pretty far away. And I think we have a lot of lab work to do to figure out, for example, this is a 3D print of my actual brain. So, there's 100 billion neurons, and we can put energy into groups of these neurons and try to record brain changes and behavior changes. But, to unleash that technology to millions or billions of people would probably not be the safest approach at this point. So
I'm sure there's efficacy there.
Well, because it's much easier, I can show you right in this part of the brain. So I'm slicing my brain off. So right in this part of the brain is the dopamine system, which is what Facebook has hijacked.
Right.
And Twitter and other things. They actually have an algorithm called Pavlov, I think.
Nice.
Sorry, I think it's called Skinner. But there's an actual algorithm out there that's trying to take advantage of these sort of dopamine pathways. So I can tell you, I could create a piece of technology that makes you feel good by zapping your dopamine. That's probably doable. But to be able to give you a piece of technology to help you clean up some of the psychology, get control of your attention, and perform better at a task so you reach your goals, that's a very hard piece of technology to actually create. And that's why, I'm in the lab, right? I'm not in a company. I'm in a lab. I'm doing this very methodically. I'm really engaging with other scientists who are skeptical about what I'm doing. And we're really trying to figure out, is this possible as a paradigm, or, do we need to just go back to meditating and that's it? And again, that's why we're coupling it with meditation as well. So we're not claiming that we'll just give you all the effects without meditation. You still have to do the work, but, this is just going to make that work a little bit faster. So.
Excellent. And so what are the kind of the results that you guys have been seeing? Because I've heard, I'm in the mindfulness crowd, right? And I know a lot of mindfulness teachers and the who's who of mindfulness science. I speak to these folks, and I understand that you're working with some masters of mindfulness and that you're getting some results from these individuals, at least from an anecdotal perspective, where they spend years of their life meditating. They spend years of their life exploring consciousness. They find some hidden, deep, dark doors that no one else understands where they are or how they work or what is behind them and unlocked. And then, some different functionalities can come from the brain and from consciousness after you unlock those things, but you're working with those folks and your technology is helping them to go farther, faster, deeper into spaces that they have not yet experienced. Tell us a little bit about that. What kind of results are you seeing?
Yeah. Well, we started working with meditation masters in a sense. So these are, you can sort of think of them like Olympic, meditators, people who are meditating for 50 years. Part of that was because we were a little worried that this might be as powerful as something like a psychedelic. We're targeting parts of the brain that deal with the sense of self, for example.
Right.
And so we wanted to start with people who have already trained their minds to deal with the weirdness that can happen if the self is modulated or if things about consciousness are all of a sudden changed. So I started actually with Shenzhen Young, who's now co-director of my lab here in Tucson.
Wow.
And Shenzhen
really
is,
cool.
It's amazing. He lives 4 blocks away from me, and we talk on the phone pretty much every morning. And he's literally one of the world masters, one of the Western mindfulness masters of the world. And Shenzhen's really a beautiful mind. He's very scientifically based. A lot of his meditation teaching has sort of metaphors from science. But he's also explored basically everything that, he's written about this in his book, The Science of Enlightenment. He's tried psychedelics. He's tried, laughing gas. He's tried, I forget the name. There's this weird chemical that he took that actually killed him for 5 minutes.
Woo.
And he was in an operating room with a doctor. He talks about this in his book, so I'm not releasing anything new. But he's tried everything to try to accelerate this consciousness path, this consciousness acceleration path. And he basically gave up in the 1990s. He said, there's really no technology or psychedelic that really does it in a healthy way to accelerate meditation. But he said, look, if there's a piece of tech that can get to the right parts of the brain at the right time while you're meditating, maybe that's going to work. So he said that in the 90s and then kind of just kept teaching as he did. And we sort of hooked up together in 2017, and I started talking about these devices that I have, and he was kind of monitoring them anyway. And we kind of came up with this crazy idea to actually just try it at my house, in the living room, in Albuquerque, when I was working for the Army Research Lab. So we did it at home, so the Army, didn't have to worry about what we were doing. And from the first session, nothing really happened with Shenzhen, but by session 2, we had tweaked the parameters a little bit, and immediately Shenzhen started feeling into what meditators call equanimity, which is this deep sense of balance in the system. But what he said was that the equanimity was something new. It's like if there's a geometric shape, right? It had just formed a new piece of the geometry where he could say, oh, there's something new to this familiar shape. And then we just started doing that on a bunch of other very advanced practitioners. And each one of them said something similar, that it really just pushed their practice in this new but familiar dimension. And that was actually teaching them something new about the practice, which is incredible. These people have been practicing for 30 to 50 years.
Wow. Yeah, I mean, that's when you're talking about the length of a human life, you have the capability of going so far, and obviously we have different physiologies, so there's going to be a LeBron James of consciousness out there versus somebody else. But you spend multiple decades doing something, and then you find a technology that assists you, and you're at the top of your game. So you're handing LeBron James the secret to jump higher, slam harder, whatever it is. I don't play basketball, but to be a better basketball player, that's pretty impressive that you're taking these master level mindfulness folks who have attained a high level of equanimity in their own existence and understanding of how their mind works and all the little distractions that it can create, etc. And then you find a new high watermark for them. That's friggin' amazing. I mean, it certainly reveals that you're in the right ballpark of the right brain areas. How much research did you guys have to do to figure out what areas to probe?
Yeah, that's a really good question. There's a small but growing meditation literature. They put people like Shenzhen in the MRI scanner and look at the brain. But there's also this growing psychedelic and flow state literature that all sort of point to similar brain regions, which is pretty cool. And they're really the brain regions around the sense of self, the control of self, and the control of attention, things like that you would imagine. So, what I started doing when I was a postdoc is really looking across all of these literatures and trying to figure out focal points in the brain. What are all these different things telling us about these practices? And ideally, LeBron James is a good example here, because if you started zapping his brain, you would want to make sure that all of is unchanged except for the one thing that you're trying to add. Right. So you don't want to make him really good at shooting 3-pointers but unable to dunk, right? Because that would be, failure. And so the same thing is true for this work that we're doing. We don't want to make you really good at attention, but now you're really bad at understanding your emotions.
Right.
So I was trying to understand, which systems in the brain are sort of organizing all of this such that we can define this as a successful change for you. And so that's, default mode network is one of the parts of the brain that we're going after right now. This is a part of the brain that really shows up when you're mind wandering, when you're sort of daydreaming and things like that. But it overactivates for depression, anxiety, post-traumatic stress disorder. It's really a target for those types of things. And surprise, surprise, when you meditate, when you go into a flow state, those parts of the brain turn down. They don't turn off, they just sort of get out of the way. And that's how you can sort of be totally engaged with the external environment. So we started targeting those in a bunch of different studies. We just ran a study during the pandemic, actually, with healthy undergraduates. And what we've been able to find is that in people who don't meditate, people who've meditated just a little bit, or people who've meditated a lot, like Shenzhen, modulating the system tends to give you certain types of meditation effects that are commensurate with how much you've meditated. And then if we're trying to teach you to meditate, like you never learned to meditate before, we downregulate the default mode network. The first things that people say are things like, oh my gosh, I'm thinking a lot. First of all, that's the first. And oh my gosh, I don't have to follow my thoughts. Or, oh wow, if I don't follow my thoughts, I feel like a little more present. I feel a little better.
Wow.
So just, first dose, 5 minutes of ultrasound at the MRI, my subjects are already having these first sort of meditation-like insights of like, oh, I don't have to sit there and torture myself with my thoughts all day.
So is MRI one of those things that's a requirement so you can dial in on exactly what part of the brain, like, and what variation, like how different are one person's brain from another person's brain on brain regions and things like that? Like, do these things grow in a little differently for everybody?
Yeah, that's a great question, actually, for your viewers. They can see on my brain, I've got these extra little folds at the back of my brain that, when I first got my brain scan, the MRI technician said, oh, you got these weird folds. And I was like, oh, shit, I have a brain tumor. But it wasn't a brain tumor. It's just every brain that you look at, even the way the folds are, just completely different. So, that's great. That's what makes it unique, obviously. But from my point of view, it's a really big pain in the butt because it's really hard across, 100 people to try to find the same spots or the right spots. So you're exactly right. Unfortunately, we have to take a brain scan on every one of our subjects. We have to use that scan to guide the ultrasound. So this ultrasound that I have is a focused beam, and it puts that beam of energy into your brain. It's very precise, and so we have to very precisely guide that. And you can actually see this little reflector system on it. Mm-hmm. So that is being guided by a camera, and the camera is connected to software that has the MRI. And it's pretty sci-fi. You can actually see the subject's brain like on the screen, and it's telling me exactly where to place the transducer.
Wow. That's pretty cool.
Yeah.
Has there ever been any thoughts, or and this could be just you could be like, Doug, this is a dumb idea, please let someone else talk. But has there ever been any thought or consideration with like coupling what you're doing with maybe like a float tank or other type of sensory deprivations to kind of get the mind to focus a little easier?
No, that's a great question. And actually, my friend Wayne Silby just texted me. He's got a float tank center in China. And we've been trying to do that. The cool thing about that idea, actually, this is a side note, but ultrasound has to be coupled. It doesn't go through air very well at all. But in a float tank, you could have like a giant transducer that's like focusing it, very precisely through the water. So it's actually a cool idea.
Oh, because the water would be the medium which you could get the signal to go.
And it's salt water, so that's
even denser.
Look, I gotta tell you, be very careful with wrapping your wires when you're gonna be dipping them into salt water.
That's the trick. Don't shock yourself.
His whole brain's lighting up. What's up?
He did.
He's having convulsive enlightenment.
His brain looks epileptic right now. What is this? It just turned off. Somebody go check on him.
I got a salt tank in the garage downstairs. I love it, and would be super interested in what kind of science you could do inside a salt tank to exacerbate the quietude and the dissolution, right? Because I mean the cool thing about the salt tank is you get in the body, the temperature of the water is exactly your skin temperature, and so the line of demarcation between self and other, at least from a physiological standpoint, where you can wave your hands in the air and feel the air and know where your body is and whatnot, that disappears in a float tank, and that would be like it's a huge accelerant for a dissolution of self experiment or experience, in that the water at least helps you erase that line of demarcation between you and the rest of the universe. That would be amazing to see what like a technology could do in that environment.
Yep. Yeah, actually Shenzhen Young, the meditation teacher I work with, had a float tank center in Los Angeles. So they would do meditation retreats in the float tank. 4 days, like in and out of the tank, for
4 days of straight tank.
Yeah. I spent more days.
Yeah, you have to check on people, right? You got to make sure that they're not turned over.
I was gonna say belly sleepers.
Yeah, but yeah, that's a good. What's really interesting about put a meditator in the scanner, look at their brains. One of the main parts that changes with meditation is called the insula, which is the part of the body that's organizing part of the brain that's organizing body representation.
Right.
So that thing you said about inner outer, self versus the external world, the body, it's doing a really good job of like demarcating where the edge of it is and where the beginning of the world is. And we know that if you take something like ketamine, you can get these out-of-body experiences that are very interesting to people. You take something like 5-MeO DMT, which is a very potent psychedelic, the body, the boundaries of the body get fuzzy, they dissolve. And again, when we think about, helping the person heal some of the psychological issues or trauma, dissolving the body boundaries is very, very psychologically healing. And I think that's a real clue to what's going on with the body relative to the psychology of consciousness. And so I think if you put someone in a float tank, then get them in that sort of relaxed body state, as you said, then stimulated their brain, and then give them a meditation practice, right? Now you're sort of stepping them into a very deep state.
And dose them with some psilocybin.
I was going to say, and dose them.
Yeah.
I was going to let you say it.
We can hit them with the fly agaric and get them with a naturally occurring NMDA antagonist, and then also muscimol. That would just be like
maybe a microdose. Maybe
Well, I mean,
the microdose will be the trick.
It makes a lot of sense because, I mean, you're talking about, any psychological trauma that you have is going to be based on a sense of self that you have. And at the point that the sense of self is rewritten by experience, right, of whether that experience is in a float tank or through psychedelics or through some technological manipulation of gray matter, that's going to help because the past perception that you had is still going to be compared to the sense of self, but now the sense of self is augmented, the sense of self is changed, and so it's going to change the whole emotional landscape connected with the traumatic experience or whatever that it was that the people are having trouble with. Man, that's some amazing work. Like, I really dig what you got going on out there. What's the other stuff? Like, you've had some success with ultrasonic. Is that the most effective treatment that you guys are working on, experimenting with, or are there others on the table that you're considering?
Yeah, it's a good question. I mean, really the most effective one is mindfulness in general, mindfulness training. So what we're really focused on is any technologies that can interact with mindfulness to accelerate it. My real deep dream is actually to use EEG, so recording the electrical activity from the brain. And you can use biofeedback, so you can display your brain activity like on a little glass brain and show you exactly what your brain is doing, or sort of an inference of it at least.
Right.
I actually think if you can figure that out right, and there's a lot of mathematical geeky stuff to get that working right, but if you can get that working and you're meditating and seeing your brain activate or deactivate, and you can see, like you're talking about with the flow state, once you figure out, you kind of know when you're getting close, and then obviously when you're in the flow state. So if you could give the brain extra information by just showing it what it's already doing, I think it'll learn a lot faster how to get into these states. And that feels intuitively better to me than actually stimulating or taking psychedelics, because it's exactly like you said, you have to learn how to get yourself there. Like, that's the real deep trick, is the brain controlling itself. And so this whole program is called neurofeedback or biofeedback. So we're really interested in biofeedback, and actually the big paradigm is like, I'm showing your brain activity in real time. So you've got EEG, you've got an ultrasound on your head that's stimulating your networks like towards a certain state,
Mm-hmm.
and you're meditating, and let's throw you in this float tank, right? So now you're floating in the tank or something, right? So now we've got the whole thing where you're learning, like, this is what it feels like to get close to the flow state. This is what it feels like to become more mindful, or to bring up some trauma from the past, let it sit in my consciousness and interact with it in a loving way instead of a fearful way, right? Like, we can get you to do this for yourself, and we're just sort of steering all the biology towards that. So that's really the big dream, is this whole sci-fi headset.
Wow. So it's not really a push button enlightenment. It's more of a training aid, kind of like the Muse headband maybe, or something that's giving you some biofeedback to help you get into that state naturally.
Exactly.
Where can I buy one?
You got to come to the lab and you got to hook up to this guy. So, yep, your head will go right in here. And
all right, so if we come out there,
Yeah. So, all right, so what's up?
if we come out there, and we're bringing a camera crew, by the way, if we come out there and we're bringing a camera crew, and you will put us in one of those things, and we'll be able to convey our experience to, of course, the researchers and also an audience who are mildly amused at our zapping our brains into diminished states of ability.
Speak for yourself.
We're gonna have all of our faculties if we come out there, aren't we?
Yes, that's the goal. Yeah,
okay,
we want to make this healthy for you.
That's awesome. So what got you into this? I mean, what got you into the idea of zapping people's brains and getting them into that higher consciousness state? Did you have consciousness expansion experiences previous to this in your life that you were like, wow, what's that all about? Or were you just kind of generally interested in consciousness, or were you interested in the brain? Like, what got you on this road?
I started as a philosophy major as an undergraduate and was always interested in the deep question of how the heck does this little, 3 pounds of jelly create conscious experience? You know, we have this beautiful and lucky, experience of the world with all the sort of different flavors that it gives. I also was reading a lot about quantum physics and quantum theories of consciousness, and also thinking like it feels a bit like maybe everything is made out of something other than matter, right? There's all these theories that matter emerges from energy and energy emerges from consciousness or something like that.
Sure.
So as an undergraduate, I was just super interested in what the heck is reality? How's it working? Is everything actually conscious? Like, more than half the world believes, Hindu and Buddhist people believe that.
Sure.
Or is it just reducible to matter and everything is meaningless and when I die, that's it, right? That's also a possibility. Totally fine. I'll accept that if that's true. So I think it started there. And then I used to do studies as an undergraduate where I actually synthesized MDMA. So this is the street drug is called ecstasy. And I used to give that to rats. Little poor rats. We would dose them with a ton of MDMA.
It's a lot of work for a bunch of ungrateful rats.
Did you make them listen to techno?
No, we were not allowed to do anything like that. You have to treat them as ethically as possible.
Why aren't you treating humans as ethically?
Oh man, that was a good one.
No, I like techno music. I'm just kidding.
So we dosed some rats and we put them in a rave.
Yeah,
that was good.
Dose the rats and put them in a rave, and we were really trying to figure out what happens to the brain. Like people were taking all this ecstasy at raves. I developed an aversion, actually a trauma, to doing this work because I had to cut the brain out, I had to cut the heart out, I had to embalm the brain, I sliced the brain. It was, I couldn't eat meat. I was totally vegan. It really sort of messed up my world for a bit. And I had a bit of a crisis as a scientist, as a young person trying to become a scientist. And I started meditating. It was a horrible time. I just needed help, with this angst that I was experiencing about science. And I decided that, this wasn't for me, that it's fine that they do research on animals, but I personally could not do that. It just felt wrong. And so I was at the point in my life where I was actually going to give up. I was going to try to be a philosopher or something like that. And I went to the Society for Neuroscience meeting, which is this big society meeting for brain scientists. And I randomly got to meet the Dalai Lama. And at this meeting, he said this very controversial thing, which was if somebody can create a technology that accelerates meditation, and he actually said if you can create a pill that gives him the effects of meditation without meditating, he would be the first one to take it.
Wow.
And I was already meditating a little bit, and getting to meet this guy, the world leaders in Buddhism, it just kind of changed my whole world. And I started thinking, okay, maybe this is a path. I then started meditating too much. You can actually have a lot of bad effects of meditation. This is a whole nother podcast topic. But I meditated myself into a pretty dark place, actually. Where, if you unravel the sense of self too much and you don't have a a culture of people around you to help you understand what's happening.
Yeah.
Right. I went sort of into a depersonalized sort of state.
Yeah.
I tasted what meditators call the void, which is basically like you see behind the matrix. There's like the matrix, and then there's behind the matrix, and
Right.
there's nothing there. And
Yeah.
it really freaked me out. And I didn't have anybody to talk to. I was 20 years old, and I was living on the beach in North Carolina, and I was meditating on the beach like a hippie with a big beard. And,
Yeah.
So, you know, that whole experience caused me to really seek out a community of people. And I learned that not only was this not a bad thing, it's actually part of traditional Buddhist paths. They have whole maps of consciousness, and this, what they call the dark night in the United States, at least, is part of the path. And it's great. You just got to keep going. And it was that whole experience of like my consciousness could shift and change, and all this weird stuff happens. And then if I contextualized it in the right way with the right people, I grew from that, and I became a way happier person. Less anxiety, more focused. My social anxiety, my speaking anxiety, all that stuff went away. And so that was the real sort of experience where it was like, this is possible. Now, how do I translate this into science? How do I do something with this to help other people?
And how long was that? Like, you know, you're in your 20s, and then you decided, I'm going to go for my PhD. And like, what is your PhD in?
The PhD is in cognitive neuroscience. So
Okay.
basically brain science.
So you made a decision to say, I'm going to go down the path and study the brain and figure out what this consciousness stuff thing, you know, figure out what creates these states. So let me ask you this question. There are a couple of camps, and I heard, you know, some twinkling of you having a foot in both boats maybe, but like Bernardo Kastrup is somebody who speaks very eloquently on the fact that consciousness could be fundamental and underneath the emergent properties of the fields themselves, if they are indeed emergent properties. And then if, of course, you know, consciousness at fundamental levels of quantum mechanics and collapsing wave functions, stuff like that, if it's down there doing that kind of stuff and beyond the Planck length of, you know, reach of non-local energy transfer, things like that, then you can't have an emergent property from the brain that creates consciousness as well. It's just simply the consciousness of the field itself coming up and then manifesting in the brain. So are you more of a consciousness is fundamental and this is how the brain is connecting into consciousness, or are you of the mind that says consciousness is an emergent property of the brain or of brains, period? Or is it a mix, or are you not sure? Is the jury out? Where are you on that?
Yeah, it's a great question. I have two hats. I have the experience that I've had on certain mind-altering substances as well as meditation. From that point of view, it feels right to me that consciousness is ever present. It's everywhere. It's everything that we are interacting with is that. But what that is not quite what we think it is. You know, that's part of the experiences that I've had.
Right.
It's weird and beautiful and it's full of love, but love is not the right word. You know, it's something completely different. Those experiences are the ones that have changed my life. My trick as a scientist is to try to figure out what was that, and is there a way to measure it, or can I use that information to update my theories to test the world? And that's where, you know, you slap up against the wall because there's tons of theories and I like all of them. I don't really subscribe to any of them, but it's very hard to really even understand how do we approach this. And what I can tell you as a brain scientist is that the brain sciences are failing at this question. And that's not a controversial statement. You talk to any of the great brain scientists,
right,
much more successful than me. When we look in the brain for consciousness, for the sense of self, even when we look for memory, we don't even know, there's no memory in the brain. That's a concept we're using to try to understand brain function.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's exciting as a brain scientist that we're at the very early stages of actually brain science. And my intuition is that we're going to discover something through the new technologies that we're creating with quantum computers and fusion and all this other stuff that's coming, that's probably actually going to teach us something about the fundamentality of consciousness in the world. And that's exciting. But all I can tell you as a brain scientist is that it doesn't really seem like it's emerging. Like, we keep trying to look for the emergent property of consciousness and we just can't find it in the brain. So that means we're probably asking the wrong questions with the wrong theories completely. And then you look to, all these wisdom traditions, Buddhism, Hinduism, even early Christianity, Judaism, all these early mystical traditions tell us things that you can experience if you take the right mind-altering things, which is, look, there's a pervasive consciousness, and that it's okay. You don't have to worry about your mind-body distinctions anymore. Like, this whole thing has you taken care of, and you are part of it. I think the closest thing in science is Carl Sagan used to say that everything is stardust. So everything around you is made out of stardust. Very deeply, I think that's something like that is going on. But we're far away, which as a scientist is the most exciting thing to say, because we have lots of stuff to discover about it.
Now, you're out at the University of Arizona, and I understand that's where Stuart Hameroff hangs his hat. And he came up with a theory of consciousness with Sir Roger Penrose, who just won the Nobel Prize for his work on black holes a few months back. What do you think about their theories of consciousness coming through microtubules of the brain and interacting with? We know that the Tsukuba Japan experiments prove that microtubules do actually interact with quantum field vibrations in warm and wet environments. So there was that argument that people were throwing out that no, microtubules can't interact with quantum warm and wet and blah blah blah. And the MIT researcher was like, yeah, actually they do. Here's the report. Where are you on that? Do you think that theory has any legs, or do you think there might be partially correct, or?
Yeah, definitely. So Stuart is the director for the Center for Consciousness Studies. So what was the joke? I'm the direct assistant to the director.
I don't know where that memory came from, but I like it.
Yeah, I haven't seen that episode of Office. I have to go watch it. But yeah, Stuart's a good friend, and he's a big reason I'm in Arizona.
Okay.
So I work very closely with Stuart. I get to hang out with Roger Penrose sometimes. He's a lovely old British scientist, old school, and very fun to hang out with.
Yeah, I got to speak at the consciousness conference and met both of them briefly. I didn't get a chance to sit down and hang out and stuff. I got to do a lot of shots of vodka with Dave Chalmers, though. That was amazing.
Nice. I bet that was fun.
It was. I love him.
Yeah, Dave is fun. So, I think the intuition that Roger had, which is that the brain is not computing information, or there's information in the brain that was not computed.
Right.
That gets to the heart of what we were just talking about.
Literally.
That if you look at the brain, it looks like little neurons or just little computers. They're making little binary computations. That's probably not true. The brain is not a computer.
Right.
And therefore, it's unlikely that we can just download our consciousness into a computer.
Right.
There's something missing to this equation. That's right. You can say that as a scientist, I think. From there, they built this nice theory, which says that there's some interaction between the quantum scale, which is very small, and the macro scale that the brain is on. And then this is where Stuart interjected this idea that the microtubules are this conduit. They're like the sort of way that you go from this small scale to this big scale. This was very controversial for a long time, but it's now, as you said, being a little bit more accepted. And I think it's a really interesting idea because, a real unified theory of consciousness needs to explain how all the different levels work together. And if consciousness is part of reality, which it seems like it is, then you ultimately have to explain, how does my experience relate to the quantum scale? And whatever's happening at the quantum scale is vibrating up in some sense to the macro scale, and we have consciousness. And so that's what their theory is trying to do. It's trying to talk about how all of these different levels are working together. It's probably wrong, and that's fine that I'm saying that. Stuart's a good friend, and he will agree. But I think that the general framework, that we need some type of fractal geometry or resonant theory, where we're talking about reality like a guitar. You pluck the string is your brain, and consciousness emerges. That's probably more correct than thinking about the brain as a computer.
Right.
So I agree in that larger context.
Okay. Yeah, it's one of the big questions for me was always, in a universe that is governed by entropy and things that get smaller and smaller and simpler, there's some kind of driving force somewhere that allows for atoms to come together to create organic molecules, which then come together to create more complex single-celled organisms, which then come together to create multi-celled organisms, and more complexity over time. And it's like, okay, what's the driving force? What's the intelligence behind that action? Because right now, science is broken as far as I'm concerned. Your fucking theory doesn't work. It doesn't even explain the basic existence of our human life watching fucking TikTok, right? It's you got to go back to the drawing board, and people who say, "Oh, consciousness is an emergent property of the brain. It just happens." Well, fuck you. You got your miracle when you talked about the Big Bang. That's your one miracle. You don't get a second miracle that, oops, consciousness just comes out of gray matter. Fuck you. You don't get that anymore. Like, what is the driving mechanism behind the atoms creating, pro-life activity? Basically, is what it is. Not from a political standpoint, but just a scientific standpoint. And then what is the the other side of it? I just had a conversation a couple of weeks ago with Donald Hoffman, who mathematically proved that consciousness can't be computed, and then also is working on a lot of mathematical proofs connected with consciousness and the complexity and things like that. And the theory of evolution by natural selection being one of the best biological theories that we have, mathematically being proved that it won't select for truth. One, there is zero probability that it selects for truth. It selects for fitness. But then the question becomes, okay, if quantum mechanics then is proving that all these experiments that we're doing is proving that time really isn't a thing, that the cause and effect is thrown out the window, and cause and effect really isn't a thing anymore. Okay, so now we're talking about the theory of evolution by natural selection. What is, if we don't have cause and effect to point to, what is the driving mechanism that selects for fitness in the theory of evolution? Because we no longer have cause and effect. It's like, you gotta throw something else in there, guys. I know you love your 17 fields of non-locality, but there's an 18th, motherfuckers, and it's consciousness.
I dig his whole deconstruction of the evolution thing, but as far as I'm concerned, that's a pretty it's a logical fallacy there, because if fitness is the paradigm for natural selection, and we are all promoting healthy body, healthy mind, and we all agree that fulfilling the basis desires of human biological need are important before they can pursue inner peace endeavors. Mm-hmm. A starving person can't focus on the meaning of life. They need to focus on eating. And if resources cost, then having things or being fit to achieve gathering them was the only path to finding meaning. So maybe he was right, but logically down the line, those fulfillments enter into a dead-end line of logic, and finding meaning is a perpetual journey that is always fulfilling.
Except that consciousness can be leading you to consciousness in that model.
It can lead you to the desire to define it.
Makes
sense. But it can never be finite.
Okay, true.
So it can lead you down a path that is perpetually and indefinitely fulfilling as long as you stay on it. Whereas gaining resources like food or wealth and stability or fitness not necessarily are those kinds of things. They're finite, hedonistic solutions to basic human desires.
Yeah.
But the fundamental one that is never ending, like our life isn't until it is the desire to implement meaning. So I get why he says that from a living thing's perspective of evolution, fitness precludes the necessity to find meaning in life. But that doesn't mean that consciousness couldn't just be another fundamental need that he hasn't achieved the necessity for.
Yeah, well, he's doing the math work on that, and it's pretty impressive because they're getting close to having at least a base model to where they can prove that everything can come from nothing, which is amazing from a mathematical perspective. But then
that's the only thing it comes from.
Well, yeah, right. I mean, yeah, right.
Literally.
Right, I know. Because there's, yes, when we're talking about the philosophy of mathematics and philosophy of, I mean, it's an invention of our our minds as a language to understand the universe rather than being fundamental to the universe.
Exactly.
Right? Yeah. So I get it. Let's not go down that deep rabbit hole. We're gonna get a lot. Or we've like 3 users left that are watching us at this point. So what does the future hold for your research? Where are you guys going next? Like, how have you gotten to the bottom of the well on the ultrasonic research and the brain stimulation, or are you looking for different modalities, or what's going on there?
Oh no, we're only beginning with the ultrasound piece. There's a lot of open questions about how ultrasound is modulating the brain, how long those effects last, is it even safe to do multiple doses? So this is really only the beginning for us with ultrasound. We like it because unlike electricity or magnetism, you can reach really deep in the brain with ultrasound.
Right.
And to really get these types of effects, these accelerating the self-healing, self-understanding processes, for example, you need to get to those deeper structures.
Yeah.
So we're just, you can't see my whiteboard, but behind me, we have 3 experiments outlined that are 14-day meditation studies. With ultrasound, if those work out and they're safe, we do that for 28 days, and then we just start expanding out to sort of deeper levels of practice. And then we add in this neurofeedback that I was telling you, the EEG, we start adding components on top of it.
Now, you're experimenting on old guys. Is that by design, that if you screw them up, they've only got a little bit of life left? And no, but I mean, are you gonna? Are you gonna? No, I mean, are you gonna be looking for undergrads with little meditation experience, kind of as a balance on controls that undergrads that don't meditate, and then undergrads that do meditate, and then undergrads that do meditate with technological assistance? Is that the kind of stuff you're setting up?
Yep. Yeah. So over the pandemic, we ran our first study with people who've never meditated. And that study, it's an MRI project. So it was at the scanner doing brain scans at the same time. And there we asked, if we just downregulated the part of the brain that's acted on by meditation, do people feel more present?
Right.
So do they feel more mindful? And that's exactly what happened relative to placebo ultrasound. The people who got the real stuff, were reporting exactly what we said, less sort of attachment to thoughts, more in the moment. A couple subjects were in the MRI, which is a weird place to be, and they reported geometric shapes. So they did have some sort of changes, which, they're just staring at the scanner, so maybe that just happens. But none of that in the placebo condition. So that's really, that's our first step. If you ask them to rate their level of mindfulness on a little scale, they were higher than the placebo. And they actually were as high as an 8-week mindfulness course,
Wow.
which is much bigger effect than we expected. And I don't think we can directly compare, because there's got to be something else going on here.
Right.
But it's really good news. That means now the next study that we couple with meditation, it looks like people who've never meditated before should get a much bigger boost with the ultrasound.
Wow. That's amazing.
I want to do that so bad.
All right, you got 3 volunteers. You got 3 volunteers.
Well, yeah,
4.
I've done it myself.
4 volunteers. We're coming out.
I don't meditate either, so this would be great for data.
Just because I just want to hang out and have a couple of beers or what. I don't even know if you drink any beers, but I just want to hang out and pick your brain and then experience that lab experience of ultrasonic and see what it's like. Because one of the things that I had in my past is a meditation-induced expansion experience out into infinity and yada yada yada. And I rank like Jeff Martin wrote a book that he outlined all the different levels of consciousness and whatnot, and I guess I'm way up on that scale most of the time. Like I'm walking around like I never experienced psychedelics at all, and Ben came into my life, and then we started doing a little bit of exploration and did some psilocybin mushrooms at one point. And I realized I'm walking around on psilocybin mushrooms all fucking day. This is how I feel 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 365 days a year. And I had no idea until I actually had that experience of doing so. So I definitely want to go out there and I want to explore what you've got going on and how that affects, my gray matter and my consciousness experience. And I know these guys are on the other side of the table want to do as well as our producer, who will unfortunately be holding a camera until he gets into the does that thing have any metal in it? Is this going to fly into the fMRI and give somebody a concussion or whatever? Or is this made of plastic? What's up with that?
That's a great question. The transducer is made out of plastic, so this is the only thing that goes in the scanner. Everything else has to stay out because, metal will fly in the scanner and it could potentially hurt you or kill you. So you have to be careful.
Yeah. Have you guys ever been in an fMRI or an MRI scanner? So you have no metal in your body left that
Correct.
you understand.
Last time I checked.
Nothing came flying out. No shrapnel.
No, I've had a lot of the MRIs done.
Nice. Okay.
So,
awesome.
Cleared.
Well, Jay, I really appreciate the time that you spent with us. If people want to understand more about what you guys are doing out there, where did they go to read about your science and what's going on? And maybe if they want to volunteer for a study or get involved or whatever, or make this a line of their education augmentation, where do they go?
Sure. So they can check out our lab. It's SEMA, SEMA, SEMA Lab at arizona.edu. And they can email me as well. You can find my email address on the website. So email. Yeah, I get emails a few times a week for people wanting to be in the study. So we will never have a lack of subjects in the lab, I think.
So what is the opening line of those emails? I want you to zap my brain.
They take two flavors. One of them is ultrasound is a weapon and it's going to be used to control humanity. There's a lot of that going on out there.
Yeah, just read Facebook about it.
Look, I actually, I've worked with the military and I am actually investigating these technologies. I'm on a board of people who look into RF, radio frequency, ultrasound, other things. So I'm aware, but I can tell you, we're not developing any of that, so please. But yeah, I take it as my job as a science educator.
So you say. You wouldn't be able to admit it if you were.
Yeah, he's part of the system for sure. This interview's over, dude. I've heard this story before. Yeah, we're not going to court-martial you.
Well, wasn't it the Manhattan Project that the different sectors didn't know what they were working on?
Yeah. Everything's super siloed.
That forever terrifies me.
Yeah. The problem, and it's amazing that they got anything done because the other side of that is you super silo everything and then nobody can work together and share information and actually get anything done, which is just blowing my mind on the speculation of people working on the alien technology and stuff and how much super siloed that stuff probably is. And especially with, I would be surprised if, you hadn't met, even not knowingly, you hadn't met the folks that are doing, exploration of the science of consciousness and try to, how to get a pilot synced with artificial consciousness or potentially real consciousness of a craft itself, that kind of thing. It's like, wow. That just kind of blows my mind at how many people are walking around the consciousness conference who are in that space working with super advanced technologies, if you know what I'm talking about. It's like that just kind of that cooks my brain a little bit on wow, how awesome is this stuff?
There's a lot of it going on, and I think for me the fundamental issue is transparency. So as long as we're doing this with transparency, just like psychedelic research, just be open about what you're doing, and you really need to be open about what's happening to people as you experiment. That's the most important piece.
Right.
And, that's partly why I came back to the university instead of the business that I created in Silicon Valley or working with the Army. Even though I liked working with them, there was some issues about, who knows what and what can I say?
Yeah.
So that's why I'm now on a committee where I watch these people and I try to make as much information publicly available because the public should know, if there's aliens, they should know, right?
Sure.
If we can turn your consciousness off and show you the true nature of your reality, they should know that. That's the stuff that they're paying for in the first place.
Well, I want you to show us how to do that when we come out there.
I hope so. I hope we can get it on film if that happens.
I'll tell you what, as soon as COVID is done, and as soon as we get a little bit of warmth going on in this climate outside, because it's a little chilly to be
2 weeks, man. We're
2
going.
weeks. 2 weeks.
Yeah, let's
we're
go.
out there in 2 weeks. We're gonna just hop in the car and be out there.
Yeah.
All right. Well, so schedule the lab
Yeah.
time. No, just kidding. But yeah, we're gonna come out there hopefully this year, and we're gonna see you.
Awesome. Well, don't come anytime in the summer because it'll be 115 degrees in Tucson. Any time besides that, you're good.
Awesome. Jay Sanguinetti, thank you very much for your time. He's Assistant Director for Center for Consciousness Studies, University of Arizona, and an amazing dude. We'll have you back on in the future. How about that?
I would love to.
Okay.
Yeah, thanks for the opportunity. It's a great conversation.
Thanks. Talk to you soon. All right, you guys know what to do. You line up that like button, you hit that share button right next, and then you send this out to your friends and get other people to subscribe to our podcast. Our merchandise store is now open. You get to go peruse the awesome shirts and hats that are available for your purchase to say, hey, I support Two Seals and a Walrus. Love you guys. Talk to you soon. Peace.
Two seals and a walrus.